Don't get into the car, stay quiet and follow me. Claire Whitmore's heel hit the bottom step and a hand clamped around her wrist. The groundskeeper hauled her sideways behind the hedge out of sight of the driveway. She told Owen Carter to let go. She had a flight in 90 minutes. He had just fired himself. He didn't let go. He jerked his chin at the man waiting beside the black sedan and said that was not the driver who came for her every week. The plate was wrong too, wrong by exactly one character. What had this man overheard the night before that made him certain that if she got into that car, she would never come back? The hedge was tall enough to hide two people and thin enough to see through. Claire pulled her wrist free and looked back at the driveway where the black sedan sat idling with its rear door open and a man in a dark suit standing beside it, hands folded, waiting for a woman who was supposed to be walking toward him right now. You have about 40 seconds before he starts wondering, Owen said, so listen fast. She did not listen fast. She looked at her watch, then at the gate, then at the man who had just put his hands on her, the one who handled the grounds, the one she saw from the kitchen window most mornings, a man past 40 who had worked the property 3 years and had never spoken to her beyond a nod. Marcus keeps the key in his left hand, Owen said. Always. He opens your door with his right, every week for 3 years. That man out there is holding the key in his right hand and he opened your door with his left. He's mirrored. He watched somebody do it and copied it backward. Claire looked through the hedge again. The driver's hands were folded now. There was nothing to see. That's it? That's what you dragged me off my own steps for? No. Owen shifted so he could see the rear of the car. The plate. Your car runs a plate ending in 479. That one ends in 479, except the middle letter's a G instead of a C. One character. You'd never catch it. I've been looking at the back of that car from behind a mower for 3 years. She was already assembling the reasonable version, the service-rotated vehicles. Marcus had a cold, or a flat, or a day off. Dispatch sent a substitute in a car from the same fleet with a plate 1 letter apart, because fleet plates run in sequences, which is exactly why they look alike. It was a Tuesday morning. Nothing about a Tuesday morning had ever been a conspiracy. You're describing a substitution, she said. Companies substitute. That's the whole point of a company. I know what it looks like. Owen's voice stayed level, and that was the part that unsettled her, because a man inventing something would have pushed harder. I wouldn't have touched you over a plate. I'd have called the office and let them sort it out. That's not why I'm standing here. Then why are you standing here? Because of what I heard last night. Claire had built a company by knowing exactly when a conversation stopped being a nuisance and started being information. She stopped looking at her watch. Owen told it plainly. The irrigation line behind the greenhouse had thrown a fault around 5 in the afternoon, and the fault meant the whole east lawn would flood overnight if nobody bled the valve. The rest of the crew had gone at 5. He had stayed. He had been kneeling in the dark at the manifold, out of sight below the glass, when 2 men came around the side of the greenhouse and stopped, because it was the one corner of the property where nobody ever was after 5. One of them was Grant. He said your name, Owen told her. He said the driver was getting swapped. He said you'd never notice because you're always late and always on the phone. He said once you were in the car, you weren't going to the airport. Claire heard the words and her mind did what it had done in every hostile negotiation of the last decade. It went looking for the version where this was a misunderstanding. Grant handled the calendar. Grant handled the cars, the house accounts, the standing bookings. All of it because 11 years ago she had been building something and he had offered to take those things off her plate, and she had let him and never taken them back. A conversation about swapping a driver was, on its face, a conversation Grant would have. A conversation about her not going to the airport was not. Who was the other man? Never saw his face. Heavier. Older than me, maybe. He did most of the talking about how it would work. Owen pulled a phone out of his jacket pocket, 3 or 4 generations old, the case gone gray at the corners. I turned this on about 40 seconds in. It's not all of it. It's enough. She stared at it. You recorded my fiancé. I recorded 2 men planning what happens to you. He held it out flat on his palm, not pressing it toward her. You can walk out to that car right now. That's your right. But if you're going to walk out there having heard this. Out on the drive, the man in the dark suit uncrossed his hands, looked toward the front door, and crossed them again. Claire took the phone. The audio was bad in the way real audio is bad. Went across the microphone. A sprinkler head ticking somewhere close. The voices came in and out like a radio between stations, and for the first 8 or 9 seconds she thought she was going to hand it back and go catch her flight. Then the greenhouse voice said the phone and the wallet came off her before anything else, and Claire's hand went still. She listened to a man she could not see explain that the car would take her out past the county line, that there was a place already picked, small, quiet, nothing around it, and that she'd be kept there. The word he used was kept, not taken, kept. The second voice asked how long. Until she signs, the first voice said. She'll fight it. First few days she'll fight it hard. Nobody argues with hunger. Claire's throat closed. She kept her face still because keeping her face still was the only thing she had ever been able to do under pressure without practicing it. The recording rolled on. After she signed, everything moved on its own. Wires cleared, filings went through. The story afterward wrote itself. A woman who had run at that speed for 11 years had burned out, walked away, stopped answering. People would believe it. People had been waiting for it. Then the second voice spoke again, closer to the microphone this time, clean, no wind on it. Claire knew it before her mind allowed the sentence to finish forming. She had heard that voice ask her whether she'd eaten. She had heard it on the phone from 4 time zones away telling her to sleep. She had heard it 11 years ago in a rented apartment with a folding table when there was no money and no company and nothing to take. She played the last 20 seconds again. The second time she was not listening for content. She was listening for any distortion, any artifact, anything that would let her say it was somebody else. There wasn't one. What surprised her, standing in the wet grass behind her own hedge, was that she did not feel it yet. She had watched people receive bad news across conference tables for a decade, and she had always assumed the collapse was immediate. It wasn't. What arrived first was an administrative calm, a list forming somewhere behind her eyes. The policy, the calendar, the accounts, the 11 years of paperwork she had never opened. The rest of it was going to come later, and she understood that she was going to need to be somewhere private when it did. Play it once more, she said. Claire. It was the first time he had used her name, and he used it the way you'd put a hand on a railing. It's not going to change. She played it once more anyway. Out on the drive, the man in the dark suit finally moved. He walked around to the driver's side, leaned in through the open window, and came back out with a phone against his ear. He said something short. He listened. He looked at the front of the house for a long moment, at the door that had not opened. He's calling someone, Owen said quietly. I know. If you're getting in that car, you need to get in it now or he's going to know something's wrong. Claire looked at the sedan. She looked at the door of her own house. 11 years of her life were inside it, and so was a man who had asked her 3 weeks ago whether she wanted the ceremony in June or September, and had seemed genuinely pleased when she said September because the quarter would be closed by then. And if you're wrong, she said, then I'm a groundskeeper who put his hands on the owner of the property and I'm gone before lunch. You won't have to fire me twice. He didn't look away when he said it. But if I'm right, and you get into that car, you don't come back. There's no middle road here. You either go or you don't. The man in the dark suit lowered his phone. Claire stepped back from the hedge. She did not run. She walked the long way around the east side of the house, through the service door by the kitchen, and stood a moment in her own hallway listening to the house be quiet. Then she went up to the second floor, to the window over the drive, and watched. The man waited another 7 minutes. He checked his phone twice. Then he closed the rear door, got in, and drove out through the gate without hurrying, which was somehow worse than hurrying would have been. At 9:40, she called Megan Shaw, who had been her attorney since the company was 9 people and a lease, and who answered on the second ring the way she always did. Claire said nothing about the recording. She said she wanted 3 things, quietly, before end of day. Every life insurance policy in her name, with face value, beneficiary, and the full amendment history. Every change to her personal financial instruments in the last 12 months, including anything executed under a power of attorney, and any legal work performed in her name by a firm that was not Megan's. There was a silence on the line that lasted about as long as it takes a good attorney to decide not to ask the obvious question first. "Are you safe right now?" Megan said. "I'm in my house." "That isn't what I asked." "I know it isn't," Claire said. "Quietly, Megan. Nothing that generates a call to anybody but me." She thought about the police for most of the next hour, sitting on the edge of her own bed with her shoes still on, and she kept arriving at the same wall. A recording made without consent, through a hedge, over a running sprinkler, in which two men who never said their own names discussed a woman who was never named after the first 10 seconds. Take that to a detective, and the detective takes it to Grant, and Grant sits in a room for 90 minutes with a lawyer and walks out, and then he would know. Then everything he had built over months went underground, and the next attempt would not come with a mirrored driver and a plate she could have checked. She needed the shape of it, all of it. The money, the reason, the people, and the place. Then she could hand somebody a box instead of a rumor, which meant going downstairs. Grant came home at 6:20. She heard the garage, the door, his keys in the dish by the stairs. The same three sounds in the same order she had been hearing for years without ever once hearing them. "I thought you were in Chicago," he said, coming into the kitchen with his jacket over his arm. He looked exactly like himself. "They moved it," Claire said. "Whole thing pushed a week. I turned around and came back in before I ever got to the car." He shook his head at the ordinary bad luck of it, set the jacket over a chair, came around the island and kissed the side of her head, one hand resting a moment on her shoulder. She made herself not move. "You want me to call the service? Make sure they didn't bill you for the run." "I'll deal with it." "Fine." He opened the refrigerator. "You eat anything today?" They had dinner at the long table. He talked about a contractor and a permit and a neighbor's fence line. He asked about the quarter. He refilled her glass without being asked, which he had done 1,000 times and which she now watched him do the way you watch a magician's hands. She understood somewhere between the second and third course that she had crossed a line she was not going to walk back. Every ordinary kindness had become evidence of something. He touched her wrist, and she thought about a man holding a key in the wrong hand. He asked whether she was sleeping, and she heard nobody argues with hunger. She could not unhear it, and she could not let him see that she had heard it. Twice she came close to saying it, once between courses, once when he laughed at something on his phone and turned the screen toward her. Both times she got as far as opening her mouth and then thought about what came after, the denial, the wounded incredulity, the 90 minutes in a room with a lawyer, and let it go. "You're quiet," Grant said. "Long day for a day where nothing happened." He smiled at that. "Take tomorrow. Sit in the yard. The world will survive." After he went up, Claire sat alone in the dark dining room and put the question in plain words because she had never solved anything by phrasing it gently. The man she was going to marry in September had spent months arranging a morning in which he would get into a car and not arrive anywhere, not to collect on her death, to keep her alive, somewhere with a door that locked from the outside, long enough and hungry enough to sign her name to whatever they put in front of her. She had a recording, a mismatched plate, and a groundskeeper who noticed which hand a man used. Grant had 11 years inside her house, control of her calendar, and no idea that any of it had gone wrong. That last part was the only advantage she had. She intended to keep it. She stopped leaving. It happened over 12 days, and she made every one of them look like a decision about work. She pushed the rescheduled Chicago trip to the following month. She canceled a dinner in the city and took the call from the study instead. She told her assistant that every change to her calendar, every car, every booking, came to her directly for confirmation before it went anywhere else, and she called it a scheduling audit, which was a thing companies did. Grant noticed on the fourth day, sideways and pleasantly, the way he noticed everything about her. He said she'd been home more this week than in the previous 2 months and asked whether something had gone wrong at the office. "Nothing's wrong," Claire said. I've been running at that speed for 11 years. I wanted to see what it was like to stop for a minute. He seemed to like that answer. He seemed to like it a great deal, and she filed that away. She tested him the following night at the table between one thing and another in the tone she used for questions she already knew the answer to. If something happened to me, would you be all right? Financially, I mean. If I got hit by something tomorrow. Grant set down his fork. That's a hell of a way to open a conversation. I'm serious. Everything's been handled for years, he said. The attorneys set all of that up back when the company was getting big. You signed it. I signed it. He was watching her now with something that looked exactly like concern. Where is this coming from? Are you sick? I'm not sick. I'm 34 and I own a company and I've never once read my own paperwork. He laughed and the subject changed. What she did not know, sitting there, was that the question stayed in the room after she left it, that Grant carried it upstairs, that he lay awake with it next to a woman who had suddenly, inexplicably, stopped getting on airplanes. Megan called the next afternoon from a car, which was how Megan called when she did not want to be in an office. You have a life insurance policy, $20 million. Grant is the primary beneficiary. Claire had expected the number to hit harder than it did. How long has that existed? 9 years, but the face value was raised 6 months ago. It was under $6 million before that. Somebody took it up by a factor of 3.5. Did I do that? Your signature did. Paper moved on the other end. It's in a stack of 11 documents executed on the same afternoon in February. Corporate filings, 2 leases, a charitable pledge, and that, all initialed, all routed through the house. Claire pressed the heel of her hand against her eyebrow. She could see the afternoon. She could see herself signing things in the back of a car between an airport and a board meeting, because Grant handled the paperwork and had handled it for years and had never once given her a reason to read it. So that's the motive, $20 million. No, Megan said. That's what I've been sitting in this parking lot about for 40 minutes. It isn't. You just told me he's the beneficiary of $20 million. On a death certificate. Megan's voice sharpened into the register she used in front of judges. Life insurance does not pay out on a missing person. It pays on a certified death. If a person disappears and there's no body, the beneficiary has to petition a court to have them declared legally dead, and in this state that's a wait measured in years. 5, 7, longer if anything about it is contested. And it would be contested because the first thing an insurer does on a $20 million claim with no remains is send investigators. Claire stood up from the desk. So if I vanish, he gets nothing. Not a dollar, not for years, maybe not ever. And every day of those years, he's the fiancé who was standing right there when you disappeared. A man who wanted that money would need you dead, found, and clearly not by his hand. Making you disappear is the single worst way to collect on that policy. Megan let it sit. Whoever built this either doesn't understand insurance at all or the policy was never the point. The recording came back to Claire whole, the way things do when the last piece drops, until she signs. She had heard it 4 times in the driveway and she had not heard it. She had been so occupied with recognizing the voice that she had never asked what the sentence was actually describing. Nobody plans a killing and then talks about a signature. It's not the insurance, she said. They don't want me dead. They want me alive and signing something. Then I need to find the something. It took Megan 2 days. She found it at a 4-attorney firm in a strip office 60 miles outside the city, the kind of practice that handled estate work for people with one house. 3 months earlier, that firm had drafted a package of documents in Claire Whitmore's name, a general, durable power of attorney granting broad financial authority, an agreement transferring a portion of her personally held shares, a block of transfer instructions, funded and ready. Every document was complete. Every field was filled. All of it had been sitting for 3 months, waiting on exactly one thing, her signature. They're not sloppy, Megan said. They're patient. That package doesn't work if you're dead. A dead woman's power of attorney is void the second she dies, and a share transfer executed by a corpse gets unwound by any first-year associate. It only works if you're alive, competent on paper, and signing. Claire sat with that. and it took her a moment to understand why it was worse than a murder plot. A murder is over. This was a room and a door that locked from the outside and a stack of paper on a table and however many days it took. "There's still a hole," she said. He could leave. He could file, take a settlement, walk out with a number most people would call a fortune. Why build this instead? Because of what he signed 11 years ago. Megan's answer came slowly, and Claire could hear her choosing the words. When the board saw where the company was going, they made you paper the relationship. It wasn't a prenup. You weren't engaged. It was a cohabitation and equity agreement. Grant waived any claim on the founder shares and any appreciation on them in exchange for support if the relationship ended. He signed it in an afternoon and made a joke about it afterward. I remember the joke. He's been living inside its consequences ever since. The house is titled to the company. If you separate, that agreement governs, and he leaves with a settlement that's real money to a normal person and a rounding error next to what he's been living in for 11 years. A car door closed on Megan's end. And here's the part that puts a clock on it. 2 months ago, your corporate counsel started drafting the actual prenuptial agreement for September. It carries every term of the old one forward and closes the last ambiguities. Once you two sign that in September, there is no interpretation left to argue. There is no door out of that structure, Claire. Not through marriage, not through separation, not through your death, because the policy is a trap of its own. Claire stood at the study window and looked out at the east lawn, where a man in a gray work jacket was moving along the hedge line. "The only door is my hand holding a pen," she said, "and it closes in September." That's what I'd tell a jury. "There's one more thing," Megan said. "The firm out there took instruction from a man named Travis Holloway, developer, was anyway. 2 failed projects, a bankruptcy still being picked over, and a debt load I can see from the outside without trying. He and Grant have met at least 9 times in 4 months." Claire ended the call and went out through the kitchen door and across the grass, and Owen straightened up when he saw her coming. She asked him to tell her the greenhouse conversation again, not the summary, everything in order, including whatever he'd left out because it hadn't seemed important. He leaned on the handle of the edger and gave it to her the way a man gives a statement. The heavier man had done the logistics. Claire would go to a small place first, close in, nothing fancy, a holding spot. Then she'd be moved somewhere else after some days because the first place was only good until people started looking, and people would look for a woman like her. Grant had asked 2 questions, whether she could get out, whether she would actually sign. And the answer? He said she'll sign, not if, when. He said it always ends the same way. Owen's jaw worked once. Then he said the part about her not having the strength for it if she'd been starved long enough. Claire looked past him at the greenhouse, at the corner of it where 2 men had stood, 40 yards from a kitchen where she'd eaten breakfast that morning. "There was one more thing," Owen said. "Not about you. The heavier one complained about freight trains, said they run all night out where he is and he can't sleep through them. She turned that over and put it somewhere safe. Write it down, everything you just told me, tonight with the date and the time you heard it." That afternoon, Claire called the car service herself from a line that was not the house line and asked about the vehicle dispatched to her address on the morning of the 9th. The dispatcher was a woman named Karen Doyle, and Karen Doyle was helpful and thorough and increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus Bell had not requested that day off. He had not called in, had not reported a mechanical issue, had not filed for a substitute, and had in fact been logged as assigned to that pickup. No replacement had been authorized. No vehicle swap appeared in the system. As far as the company's records went, the car that pulled into Claire's driveway that morning had never been dispatched at all. Then who told Marcus not to come? There was a long silence, and then Karen Doyle said carefully that Mr. Bell had received a text the night before from the account that managed the Whitmore booking, moving him to a later run. Claire thanked her and hung up and stood very still in her own study. Someone with access to her schedule had moved her real driver off a job, put a stranger in a matching car with a plate 1 letter off, and sent it to her door. That was not a company failure. That was a person, and the list of people with that access had one name on it that was not hers. Megan built the rest over the next 2 days, and every piece came back with the same texture. Not clever, just patient. Grant and Holloway had been in contact nearly every day for 4 months. Not 9 meetings, and something close to 400 communications. 6 weeks before the 9th, Holloway had taken a large cash withdrawal out of the last account his bankruptcy trustee hadn't frozen. 3 days later, an amount within a few $100s of it landed in the account of a man named Dale Rooney, who held a commercial driver's license and had never worked for Claire's car service or any company that had ever done business with her. "That's your driver," Megan said. Claire spread it across the study desk that night after Grant went up. Motive: an agreement with no exit and a deadline in September. Instrument: a folder waiting for a signature. Money: cash out of Holloway, cash into Rooney. Method: a stranger, a matched car, a text message from her own account. Access: one person. "Take it in," Megan said on the phone. "Tomorrow. You have enough." Enough for what? Enough for a conversation with a detective. That's exactly my point. Every single thing on this desk is preparation. Rooney drove a car to a house and drove away empty. Holloway took his own money out of his own account. Grant met a man for coffee 9 times and moved a driver on a schedule he's allowed to move. Claire looked down at the paper. "A good attorney takes this apart in an afternoon, and you know it better than I do." Megan did not argue, which was its own kind of confirmation. "And we still don't know where," Claire said. "There's a place. They've had it for months. If the police pick Grant up tomorrow, that place stays empty. Holloway walks away from it, Rooney disappears, and I spend the rest of my life checking license plates. They built a machine. The only way to prove a machine works is to let it run." The line went quiet long enough that Claire could hear the road on the other end. "Say it plainly," Megan said. "I want to hear you say it out loud because I want you to hear it too." Claire looked at her own reflection in the window, laid over the dark lawn. 11 years of a life that had been assembled around her by a man who had been measuring it for exit value the entire time. "I'm going to give them a second chance. I'm going to put a trip back on the calendar. I'm going to tell Grant I need a car at 9 o'clock and I'm going to get in it." She spent an afternoon downtown with a detective named Ray Sutter and brought a box, the recording with a transcript and Owen's signed statement, the insurance amendment and Megan's opinion on why it was useless, the unsigned package with every field filled and one line blank, Holloway's withdrawal and Rooney's deposit 3 days later, 400 communications in 4 months, Karen Doyle's confirmation that Marcus Bell had been moved off the job by a text from Claire's own account. Sutter read for a long time before he looked up, and then he told her the honest version. What she had was preparation, and preparation was thin, and a competent attorney would take it apart in an afternoon, which was exactly what Claire had told Megan the night before, and exactly why she was sitting there. They built it in a day. 3 unmarked cars staged along both plausible routes to the airport, instructed to stay far back. The booking would be left in the system untouched, and, this was Sutter's insistence, Grant's access to her scheduling would be left open exactly as it was so that he could swap the driver a second time without ever encountering a locked door. Karen Doyle would say nothing to anyone. Claire would carry a location beacon sewn into the lining of her coat and a second one in the heel of her left shoe. Owen found her at the edge of the drive that evening while she was walking the route the car would take. "You're getting into it," he said. It wasn't a question. "There's no other way to find out where they were taking me. I pulled you out of that car." He looked at the gate, then back at her. 12 days later, you're getting in on purpose." 12 days ago, I didn't know anything. Now I know all of it except the one thing that matters. 3 police vehicles on that road, 2 transmitters on my body." She almost smiled. "This time I'm the one running it." He didn't tell her she was wrong. He told her to keep the coat on. What neither of them knew was that the thing had already come apart 5 days earlier in a hallway on the second floor of her own house. When Megan pulled the full amendment history on the policy, the carrier's service desk did what carriers do when a policy that size gets touched. They ran a verification call to the named beneficiary of record. Grant answered it standing outside the bedroom door. He was pleasant to the woman on the phone. He confirmed his date of birth and his address and thanked her for the diligence. Then he stood in the hallway holding a dead phone and put three things in a row, and they fit together with a click he could feel in his chest. A woman who had asked him at dinner what would happen to him if she died. A woman who had not boarded an airplane in a week after 11 years of never being home. And a woman whose attorney was at that exact moment pulling her life insurance file apart. He wasn't certain. He was close, and close is not the same, and a man who moves on close loses everything. So he waited 5 days, and on the morning of the 21st at 7:40, he called the car service himself from the study and asked Karen Doyle to confirm the pickup time in the mild, slightly bored voice of a man double-checking something he already knew. Karen Doyle had been sitting with police instructions since the previous afternoon. She confirmed the time, then she confirmed the vehicle, then she confirmed the driver assignment and the route, and told him that everything was completely normal, absolutely standard, nothing at all out of the ordinary on their end. Grant listened to a dispatcher volunteer 4 things he had not asked about, and swear to the normality of a morning nobody had suggested was abnormal. He thanked her and hung up and knew he did not stop it. Stopping it told Claire he knew. Letting it run for 9 more minutes did not. He made one call and it lasted 11 seconds, and all he said was that she would be wired and to strip her before she was anywhere near the room. At 9 o'clock, the black sedan came through the gate. Claire came down the steps in the coat. Dale Rooney opened the rear door with his left hand, holding the key in his right, and she thanked him and set her bag on the seat. He drove toward the airport. For 11 minutes, he drove exactly the way a man drives to an airport, and she watched a gray sedan 4 cars back that never gained and never dropped. Then Rooney said the interstate was backed up past the interchange and he'd take the frontage road around, and he moved right and took the ramp. Claire knew every road inside 40 miles of her own house. The frontage route did not go around the interchange. It ran east, into the industrial flats, away from every runway in the county. She let 2 miles go by before she spoke, evenly, the way she spoke to people across tables. "How long have you been driving, Mr. Rooney?" His eyes came up into the mirror and stayed half a second too long. "You're not taking me to the airport," Claire said. "I know what you were paid. I know it was cash, and I know it came from a man 3 years into a bankruptcy. That's who's covering you. Think about what that's worth when this comes apart. They will hand you over inside an hour, and they will not spend $1 defending you because you are the only one of them who has ever been in a car with me." Rooney's hands moved on the wheel. He checked the mirror twice in 4 seconds. The car came down 5 miles an hour without him deciding to slow it, and Claire understood that she had him, that he was maybe 90 seconds from the shoulder. His phone rang. He answered and said nothing at all. He listened for 4 seconds, and Claire watched his face go from a man deciding something to a man who had been told what to do. The rear doors locked. He reached back without looking and took her phone off the seat. The car accelerated hard, and at the next intersection he turned north instead of east, off every route the police had staged. Claire turned and looked out the back window. The road behind her was empty. She looked for a long time at 4 lanes of nothing, and that was the moment the 12 days collapsed on her. Not the locked doors, the empty glass. She had walked into this believing she was the one running it, and the belief had been false since a hallway on the 2nd floor of her own house, and it had never once occurred to her that they might be watching her the entire time. She thought she was watching them. The sedan ran 12 minutes into a dead industrial tract and stopped in front of a warehouse she had never seen. Travis Holloway was waiting at the loading door, heavier than she'd pictured, older, and he took her arm without any particular violence, the way a man handles freight. Just inside, he stopped. He took the coat first. He turned it inside out on the concrete and ran his hands along the lining until he found the seam that had been opened and closed again, and he pulled the beacon out and dropped it. Then he told her to take off her shoes, and he took those too, and he did all of it without hurry and without surprise, because he had been told exactly what to look for. Claire stood on the cold floor in her stocking feet, and understood that Grant had known before she got in the car. The room at the end of the corridor had a covered window and a steel door that locked from the outside. There was a metal table in the middle of the floor. On the table were a folder and a pen. "The police know where I am," Claire said. "There were 3 cars on that road this morning." Travis actually smiled. He told her the sedan was leaving right now, and it was going to the first location, the one she'd been meant to see, and it was going to sit there. Every unit they had would converge on an empty car at an address her own operation had handed them. They were using her trap to move the police away from her. He stepped into the corridor to make a call, and the acoustics of a concrete building did what concrete always does. She heard him report the change of location. She heard him confirm it had been the right call, that the other man had been correct to order it the second it was clear she knew. She heard 11 years of her life reduced to logistics by 2 men on a phone. Then Travis asked about the folder, whether they were still running it the way they'd planned, whether he should put it in front of her and start the clock. Grant did not answer immediately, and Claire, standing 4 feet from a steel door, understood exactly what the silence was. He was doing arithmetic. A signature was only worth something if it was clean, and hers would never be clean again. Not from a woman who had gone to an attorney and a detective and had put unmarked cars on a road. Every document in that folder had died the moment she got into the car, knowing she had stopped being an asset. She had become a witness. "She knows too much," Grant said, loud enough to carry. "End it." Travis said one word and the call was over. Claire heard the sedan start outside. She heard it turn and pull away, and she stood in a small room listening to the engine get smaller until there was nothing left of it at all. She went to the door. It didn't move. She turned out her pockets for a phone that had been taken from her 30 minutes ago. She put her hands on the covered window and found plywood behind the fabric. She shouted twice, and the building gave her back the sound of her own voice off concrete. Nobody on Earth knew where she was except the 2 men who had put her there, and one of them had just given the other an instruction. 14 miles away, the police took the black sedan at the first warehouse and found the rear seat empty. Dale Rooney went face down on the gravel and started talking inside of 10 minutes, and everything he had to give was worthless because the only address he had ever been given was the one they were standing in. Travis had taken the woman off him at a turnout and sent him on with the car. The beacons had gone dark at that same turnout, 11 miles from anywhere, in the middle of a road with nothing on either side of it. Owen heard it from Megan, and he did not sit down. He went back over 3 weeks in his head, and what he came out with was a vehicle. Holloway's truck had come to the property 4 times, always late in the day, and it had always parked on the gravel apron by the service gate because Owen swept that apron twice a week and had twice hosed red clay out of it. Red clay. There was none in that county soil, not around the estate, not on any road within 20 miles of it. It came from wherever the truck lived, and the heavier man had complained behind the greenhouse that freight trains ran all night where he was and he couldn't sleep through them. Sutter put the 2 together with the county soil survey and the industrial rail corridors, and the map went from 100 square miles to 11 old warehouse parcels sitting on red clay within earshot of a working freight line. Inside the room, Claire had stopped waiting to be found. She found an old pipe running floor to ceiling through the corner of the wall and a narrow ventilation gap above the door. She pulled a strip of metal off a collapsed shelving rack and worked it against the pipe in slow, deliberate sets of 3, over and over, sending sound through steel into whatever part of that building was not this room. She was still doing it when the door opened. Travis crossed the floor, took the strip out of her hand and threw it down the corridor, and told her the nearest occupied building was 1.5 miles away. So she used the only thing she had left, which was talk. She asked about the money and the firm and how long Grant had been paying him, and she asked it badly enough on purpose that he lost his temper and told her Grant was on a plane out of the city before midnight and that she would be somewhere else long before that anyway. Her time was no longer measured in days, it was measured in hours. He came around the table to move her, and outside the covered window, close enough to shake the frame, a freight horn went off. The building was surrounded 4 minutes later. Travis got Claire as far as the rear roll-up door before 2 officers came through it. and she walked out into daylight in her stocking feet, 15 minutes at most before she was scheduled to be moved to an address nobody had. Grant had already been told they'd found her. He was putting a bag into the trunk at the top of the drive when the units came through the gate. Claire got out first. He stopped with his hand on the trunk lid, and she watched the arithmetic run out behind his eyes, because by the plan he had authorized 4 hours earlier, there was no world in which this woman walked across this gravel toward him. She didn't shout. "The plate was one letter off," she said. He held the key in the wrong hand. "There's a folder on a metal table with every line filled in but one." She stopped a few feet from him. "You told him I knew too much. You told him to end it. I was standing on the other side of the door." Grant broke in front of the car. What came out of him was not remorse. It was a grievance he'd been keeping, item by item, for a very long time. That his name was not on a single piece of paper in that house. That for 11 years he had been introduced at parties as the man who's with Claire and had watched the person's eyes go past him to find her. That he had signed something in his 30s as a joke in an afternoon without reading it, and had spent every year since discovering what it meant. He had lived in her house, driven her cars, spent from accounts he could not have opened, and none of it had ever been his, not 1 square foot of it, and in September a second signature was going to make that permanent in a way no court would ever reopen. Travis had listened to 4 months of that and turned it into a plan with one virtue. If Claire signed, Grant never had to leave any of it. "If you were that unhappy," Claire said, "why not just go?" He had no answer because the answer had already been given in a recording made behind a greenhouse. He had never wanted to keep Claire. He had wanted to keep what was hers. They took him from the driveway. Rooney's statement, Holloway's statement, Owen's recording, the unsigned package, the cash out and the cash in, 4 months of communications and 2 locations made a chain with no gaps in it. She found Owen on the east lawn 2 days later. "You saved me twice," she said. "Once by pulling me off those steps, once by noticing dirt on a truck." "Anybody who sees something wrong should do something about it," he said. That's all that was. She offered him money and he declined it because he didn't want the thing he had done turned into a transaction, and she respected that enough to stop asking. Instead, she offered him a position running facilities and operational safety on the grounds that he had already demonstrated he was better at it than anyone she employed. She kept running the company. She also read her own paperwork now. She had audited every number in deals worth billions and had never once looked at the small changes inside her own life. She understood, too, that distance can end a relationship, and that it has never once excused greed or betrayal or a locked door. Weeks later, a black sedan stopped at the bottom of her steps, almost exactly like the morning Owen pulled her behind the hedge. Claire walked down. Then she stopped. She checked the plate. She watched the driver's hands. She pulled up her schedule and confirmed the booking against it. Then she got in. Across the lawn, Owen looked up from his work and nodded once. She smiled back and the car pulled away. Money and power let a person control a great many things. They do not make anyone immune to betrayal. Never measure a warning by the standing of the person giving it. The small details everyone else overlooks can save a life, and when someone sees something wrong, the courage to say it out loud can be worth more than any amount of power.